The fog clung to Rosewood Villa like a shroud, its turrets looming over the Sussex Downs. Inside, the grand clock struck midnight, its chimes swallowed by an eerie silence. In the study, Colonel Reginald Hawthorne lay slumped over his desk, an antique dagger buried in his chest. Blood pooled on the mahogany, staining a half-written letter. The household slept, unaware, yet someone had slipped through the shadows, their motive as dark as the night. Hercule Poirot, summoned by a desperate telegram, arrived at dawn. Who among the villa's denizens held the key to this grim riddle? Chapter 1. The Arrival at Rosewood. The Sussex dawn broke with a reluctant glow, its amber light struggling through a fog that clung to Rosewood Villa like a spectral veil. The estate, a sprawling monument of Victorian grandeur, stood sentinel over the rolling downs, its turrets piercing the mist like the masts of a ship lost at sea. Ivy crawled up its stone facade, whispering secrets of decades past, while the air carried a damp chill that seemed to seep into the bones. Hercule Poirot, impeccable in his tailored overcoat and polished shoes, stepped from the motor car, his cane tapping a precise rhythm on the gravel drive. His mustache, meticulously groomed, twitched as he surveyed the scene, his sharp eyes absorbing every detail of the villa's somber beauty. Inspector Japp awaited him at the entrance, his face etched with the weariness of a man who had seen too many tragedies in too few hours. "Monsieur Poirot," he greeted, his voice rough with fatigue. "It's a bad business. Colonel Reginald Hawthorne, found dead in his study last night, stabbed through the heart with an antique dagger. No sign of forced entry, no witnesses, at least none willing to speak." Japp's brow furrowed, his hands buried in the pockets of his rumpled coat. "The household's in a state, and the local constabulary's out of their depth. I knew you'd want to see it yourself." Poirot inclined his head, his expression unreadable. "The locked room. It is always intriguing, n'est-ce pas? The mind. It begins to work, to arrange the pieces of the past." Shelves groaned under the weight of leather-bound tomes, maps of colonial campaigns, and trophies from distant lands. A massive mahogany desk dominated the space, its surface cluttered with papers, an inkwell, and a half-burned candle. And there, slumped in a high-backed chair, was the colonel himself, his lifeless form a stark contrast to the vitality he once commanded. His silver hair was disheveled, his face frozen in a grimace of surprise. An antique dagger, its handle carved with serpentine motifs, protruded from his chest, pinning him to the chair like a grim exhibit. Blood had pooled on the desk, staining a sheet of paper bearing the cryptic words, "The past is not buried." Poirot's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene, his mind already sifting through details. "The dagger, it is not ordinary," he murmured, leaning closer without touching it. "Indian, perhaps, from the colonel's days in the Raj?" He noted the locked windows, their heavy curtains undisturbed, and the door, which Japp confirmed had been bolted from the inside. A puzzle indeed. The killer, they were clever or desperate. Japp nodded, pointing to the letter. "Found it right there, under his hand. No one knows what it means, but it's fresh ink on old paper. Strange that." He scratched his chin, his skepticism palpable. "The household's waiting in the drawing room. They're a mixed lot, family, staff, and a guest or two. All claim they were asleep when it happened, but someone's lying." Poirot's gaze lingered on the letter, its words a tantalizing clue. "The past, it is a shadow that follows us all," he said softly. "Let us meet these shadows, Inspector. Introduce me to the players in this drama." The drawing room was a study in tension, its occupants arranged like pieces on a chessboard, each eyeing the others with suspicion or guarded neutrality. Eleanor Hawthorne, the colonel's daughter, sat by the fireplace, her auburn hair pinned tightly. her green eyes cold as jade. She was in her late 20s, her posture rigid, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "My father and I were not close," she said when Poirot questioned her. Her voice clipped. "He disapproved of my marriage. I came to reconcile, but—" slightly as he poured tea. "I heard nothing, sir," he said, his voice steady but his eyes avoiding Poirot's. "I retired at 10, as always." Poirot's moustache twitched. Loyalty could mask many sins. Miss Clara Beaumont, the governess, was a striking figure. Her dark hair swept into a chignon, her grey dress severe yet elegant. She spoke softly, her French accent faint but discernible. "I was with the children, reading them to sleep," she said, her eyes meeting Poirot's briefly before dropping. Something in her composure intrigued him, a still stillness that felt practiced. Captain Arthur Ramsay, the final suspect, was a weathered man in his 50s, his military bearing marred by a pronounced limp. His face, scarred from some long-ago conflict, twisted with bitterness as he spoke of the colonel. "He was my commanding officer in India. Ruined me over a scandal I didn't cause. I came to settle old debts, not to kill." His defiance rang hollow, and Poirot noted the clenched fists at his sides. As the interviews concluded, Poirot paced the drawing room, his cane tapping a slow rhythm. Each suspect had a motive: estrangement, greed, loyalty, revenge, betrayal. Yet the locked study and the cryptic letter suggested a deeper game. He returned to the study alone, his grey cells humming. The dagger's origin was key. Its craftsmanship pointed to a specific moment in the colonel's past. The letter, too, was deliberate, its words a taunt or a warning. Poirot knelt by the desk, his eyes catching a faint scratch on the floorboards, barely visible under the rug. He pressed it, and a soft click revealed a hidden panel, leading to a narrow passage. "Mon Dieu," he whispered, his mind racing. The passage could explain the locked room, but who knew of its existence? He rose, dusting his knees, and glanced at the letter again. The ink was fresh, but the paper's yellowed edges suggested age, a deliberate misdirection, perhaps? The household's alibis were flimsy, each suspect's story riddled with gaps. Eleanor's isolation, Cedric's debts, Grayson's trembling hands, Clara's guarded demeanor, Ramsay's bitterness, all were thread. Little to dispel the gloom that hung over Rosewood Villa. Its rays filtered through the ever-present Sussex fog. The grand hall, with its towering portraits and muted chandelier, seemed to hold its breath as Hercule Poirot paced its marble floor, his cane tapping a deliberate cadence. The discovery of the hidden passage had ignited his curiosity, but it was the human element, the motives lurking behind the faces of the household, that now commanded his attention. Each suspect, he knew, carried a shadow of intent, and it was his task to illuminate the truth. Inspector Japp, hovering nearby, adjusted his hat and muttered, "They're all hiding something, Poirot. Mark my words, this lot's as slippery as eels." Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing beneath it. "Mon ami, it is not the eel that concerns me, but the hand that holds it. Let us begin with the interviews, for it is in their words and their silences that the truth will reveal itself." He gestured toward the drawing room, where the suspects awaited, their nerves frayed by the weight of suspicion. The air was thick with the scent of old roses and the faint tang of fear, as if the villa itself conspired to guard its secrets. Eleanor Hawthorne sat by the fireplace, her posture as rigid as the iron poker beside her. Her auburn hair was pinned tightly, but a single strand had escaped, betraying her composure. Her green eyes, sharp as cut glass, met Poirot's with a defiance that bordered on hostility. "My father was a tyrant," she said, her voice low but steady. "He disowned me when I married Charles against his wishes. I came to Rosewood to mend things, but he refused to see me." She paused, her fingers twisting the lace of her sleeve. "I was in my room all night, Monsieur Poirot. I heard nothing, saw nothing." Her alibi was simple, but its lack of corroboration intrigued Poirot. A daughter scorned, he mused, might harbor a grudge deep enough to kill. Yet her eyes held not guilt, but a quiet sorrow. He noted it, filing it away for later scrutiny. Next, Poirot turned to Cedric Langley, but probing. Cedric nodded vigorously. Too quickly. "Yes, asleep, I swear it." Poirot smiled thinly, his gray cells noting the sweat beading on the young man's brow. Mr. Grayson, the butler, stood near the door, his posture as impeccable as his starched collar. His gray hair and lined face spoke of decades in service, but his hands, clasped behind his back, trembled faintly as he spoke. "I served the colonel for 20 years, sir," he said, his voice measured, almost mechanical. "I locked up at 10, as always, and retired to my quarters. I heard no disturbances." Poirot's gaze lingered on Grayson's hands, the tremor betraying a crack in his stoic facade. "And the colonel? He was content that evening?" Poirot asked. Grayson hesitated, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "He seemed preoccupied, sir. He asked me to fetch his old campaign journals from the attic, but I found nothing amiss." Poirot's mustache twitched. The attic, where the maid had heard footsteps. Was Grayson's loyalty a mask for something darker? Miss Clara Beaumont, the governess, presented a different puzzle. Her dark hair was swept into a severe chignon, her gray dress modest yet elegant, accentuating her quiet beauty. She sat with her hands folded, her eyes meeting Poirot's briefly before dropping to the floor. "I was with the children, reading them a story until they slept," she said, her voice soft, tinged with a faint French accent. "I retired afterward and heard nothing." Her composure was almost too perfect, Poirot thought, like a painting with no visible brushstrokes. He pressed gently. "You knew the colonel well, mademoiselle?" Her lips tightened. "Only as my employer. He was distant." The brevity of her answers intrigued Poirot. She volunteered nothing, yet her eyes held a depth of emotion he could not yet decipher. Captain Arthur Ramsay, the final suspect, was a man worn by time and resentment. His scarred face and military bearing spoke of a life of conflict, and his limp, pronounced as he paced the room, secrets intimately. Poirot returned to the study, his mind a whirl of details. The dagger, with its serpentine handle, was a relic of the colonel's time in India, a clue to a past that refused to stay buried. The letter, "The past is not buried," was written in fresh ink on aged paper, a deliberate act to mislead or to confess. Poirot knelt by the desk, his fingers tracing the scratch on the floor that had revealed the passage. It was a clever mechanism, hidden for years, yet someone had used it to deadly effect. He examined the cigarette case again, found near the passage's entrance. Cedric claimed it was a gift, but its proximity to the crime scene was too convenient. Was it planted to incriminate him, or had he been careless? Poirot's gaze fell on the letter, its smudged fingerprint a tantalizing clue. The ink was fresh, but the paper's yellowed edges suggested it had been taken from an older document, perhaps one of the colonel's journals. Poirot requested Grayson to bring the journals from the attic, and the butler complied, his hands steadier now, but his eyes wary. The journals, bound in cracked leather, chronicled the colonel's campaigns in India, detailing battles, betrayals,
and a scandal involving a stolen artifact. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he read a passage about a young officer, Ramsay, disgraced over a missing dagger. The same dagger, perhaps, that now lay buried in the colonel's chest. The journals also mentioned a woman, a servant, wronged by the colonel and dismissed in disgrace. Could this connect to Miss Beaumont, whose French accent and guarded demeanour hinted at a deeper story? Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a maid, her voice trembling as she approached.
"Sir, I didn't want to say before, but I heard footsteps in the attic last night, around midnight. Heavy ones, like someone pacing."
Poirot's moustache twitched. The attic, the passage, the dagger, the letter, all were threads in a tapestry of deception. He thanked the maid, his mind racing. The footsteps suggested the killer had lingered, perhaps planning or disposing of evidence. But why the attic? Was there more to find?
Cedric's desperation, Grayson's tremors, Clara's secrecy, Ramsay's rage. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture remained incomplete. The passage had provided entry, the dagger a weapon, the letter a taunt. But who had woven them together? Chapter 3. The Hidden Passage. The fog over Rosewood Villa thickened as the morning waned, wrapping the estate in a cocoon of secrecy that seemed to mirror the tangled motives of its inhabitants. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hall, his cane resting lightly in his hand, his sharp eyes scanning the portraits that lined the walls. The stern faces of the Hawthorne lineage gazed back, their painted eyes holding secrets as old as the villa itself. The discovery of the hidden passage had shifted the puzzle of Colonel Hawthorne's murder, transforming a locked-room mystery into a labyrinth of possibilities. Yet it was the human element, the flicker of guilt, the weight of silence, that Poirot knew would lead him to the truth. Inspector Japp, hovering nearby, scratched his chin, his skepticism a familiar counterpoint to Poirot's precision. "A secret passage, Poirot? Sounds like something out of a penny dreadful. But I'll wager someone in this house knew about it." Poirot's mustache twitched, a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. "Mon ami, the truth, it is often more dramatic than fiction. The passage, it is not merely a device, it is a confession of intent. Let us explore its secrets, and then we shall see who among our suspects walks in its shadows." He turned toward the staircase, his steps measured but purposeful, as he made his way to the attic where the maid's whispered report of footsteps had piqued his curiosity. The attic was a cavern of dust and memory, its low ceiling crisscrossed with beams that groaned under the weight of time. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and forgotten relics, and the single window, caked with grime, admitted only a sliver of gray light. Poirot's cane tapped rhythmically as he navigated the cluttered space, his eyes tracing the footprints in the dust that the maid had mentioned. They were faint but unmistakable, leading to a paneled wall that seemed unremarkable at first glance. He pressed his fingers along with its serpentine handle, gleamed in the dim light, and the cryptic letter, "The past is not buried," lay undisturbed. Poirot's grey cells hummed. The passage explained the locked room, but it raised new questions. Who knew of its existence? And why had they chosen such a theatrical method for murder? He returned to the attic, examining the footprints more closely. They were smudged, their size indeterminate, but a faint trace of mud suggested the intruder had come from outside before ascending. Poirot's mind turned to the suspects, each a piece in the intricate puzzle. Eleanor Hawthorne, with her estrangement and sorrow. Cedric Langley, with his debts and nervous tics. Mr. Grayson, the butler, with his trembling hands. Miss Clara Beaumont, the enigmatic governess. And Captain Arthur Ramsay, with his festering grudge. The passage was a secret only someone intimate with the villa could know, perhaps someone who had lived here long enough to uncover its hidden corners. Poirot summoned the household to the drawing-room, their faces a gallery of unease. He began with Miss Beaumont, whose composed exterior intrigued him most. She sat with her hands folded, her grey dress a stark contrast to the room's opulence. "Mademoiselle, you are familiar with the villa's layout?" Poirot asked, his tone deceptively mild. Her eyes flickered, meeting his for a fraction of a second before dropping. "Only as much as my duties require," she replied, her French accent soft but distinct. "I spend my days with the children, not exploring dusty corners." Poirot noted the slight tightening of her lips. "And last night you were with the children until they slept?" She nodded, her gaze steady now. "Yes, reading them a story. They can confirm it." Yet something in her stillness, a practiced calm, set Poirot's instincts alight. He let the question linger, unresolved. Turning to Captain Ramsay, Poirot adopted a sharper tone. "Monsieur, you spoke of a scandal with the Colonel, one that cost you your career. Tell me, did it involve an artifact? Perhaps a dagger?" Ramsay's scarred face darkened, his limp more pronounced as he shifted in his chair. It was a young officer, Ramsay, had been accused of stealing a pair of ceremonial daggers, gifts from a local potentate. One dagger had vanished, the other remained in the Colonel's possession. Was the murder weapon that same dagger, kept as a trophy of Ramsay's disgrace? Poirot's mind raced. The letter, too, demanded scrutiny. Its ink was fresh, but the paper was old, torn from a journal or ledger. He found a smudged fingerprint on its edge, too faint to identify, but suggestive of haste or carelessness. Grayson, the butler, was summoned next. His hands, still trembling, betrayed a nervousness that clashed with his polished demeanor. "The Colonel was particular about his study," Grayson said, his voice steady, but his eyes darting. "He often worked late, writing or reading his journals. I locked the house at 10, as always." Poirot leaned forward. "And the attic, monsieur? You fetched journals from there recently. Did you notice anything unusual?" Grayson hesitated, a bead of sweat forming on his brow. "Nothing, sir. Just dust and old trunks." Poirot's smile was thin. The butler's unease was palpable. But was it guilt, or merely the strain of the moment? Eleanor Hawthorne, questioned again, revealed more of her fractured relationship with her father. "He wrote to me last month, asking me to visit," she said, her voice softening. "I thought he wanted to reconcile, but when I arrived, he was cold, distant. He said he was rewriting his will." Her eyes glistened, but she held her composure. Poirot noted the mention of the will, missing from the study's safe. Was Eleanor's sorrow genuine, or a mask for greed? Cedric, meanwhile, grew more agitated when pressed about his debts. "I owed thousands," he admitted, his fingers clutching the cigarette case. "But I didn't kill him. I was asleep." His desperation was convincing. Yet the cigarette case's proximity to the passage gnawed at Poirot's suspicions. Poirot returned to the passage, descending its steps once more. At the bottom, near the study's concealed door, he found a tiny scrap of fabric caught on a protruding nail. It was gray, fine wool, matching the shade of Miss Beaumont's dress. He tucked it in attic's footprints, the passage's mud, the fabric's gray hue. The pieces were aligning, but the picture remained elusive. The villa's silence was oppressive now, its walls seeming to pulse with hidden truths. Poirot stood by the study's window, gazing into the fog. The dagger, the letter, the passage, the fabric, all pointed to a killer who knew the Colonel's past and the villa's secrets. Miss Beaumont's composure, Ramsay's bitterness, Grayson's tremors, Eleanor's sorrow, Cedric's desperation. Each was a shadow, but which cast the darkest? Poirot's gray cells worked tirelessly, arranging the clues into a pattern only he could see. Chapter 4. The Missing Will. The fog that enveloped Rosewood Villa seemed to thicken with each passing hour, as if the estate itself conspired to obscure the truth of Colonel Hawthorne's murder. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hall, his polished cane resting lightly in his hand, his sharp eyes tracing the intricate patterns of the marble floor. The discovery of the hidden passage and the scrap of gray fabric had sharpened his focus, but it was the absence of the colonel's will, last seen in the study's safe, that now stirred his gray cells. A missing will, he knew, was not merely a document lost. It was a motive laid bare, a spark that could ignite the flames of greed, betrayal, or desperation. Inspector Japp, pacing nearby, adjusted his hat with a grunt. "No will, no witnesses, and a house full of liars," he muttered. "This case is a devil's knot, Poirot." Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile betraying his relish for the challenge. "Mon ami, a knot, however tangled, can be undone with patience and precision. The will, it is the key to the heart of this mystery. Let us seek it, and in doing so, uncover the desires it has awakened." He turned toward the study, his steps deliberate, his mind already weaving the threads of evidence into a tapestry of suspicion. The study remained a somber tableau of the colonel's final moments. His body, now covered with a sheet at Japp's insistence, lay slumped in the high-backed chair, his voice trembling slightly. "I saw it last in this very study, locked in the safe. It named Miss Eleanor as the primary heir, with provisions for Mr. Langley and a few charities. But the colonel mentioned recently he intended to revise it." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Revise it how, monsieur?" Whitby hesitated. "He spoke of disinheriting Miss Eleanor entirely due to personal differences. He planned to favor Mr. Langley and certain staff members." Poirot's mustache twitched. A rewritten will, now missing, was a motive that burned brightly in the shadows of Rosewood Villa. Poirot returned to the drawing room, where the suspects awaited, their faces a gallery of guarded expressions. Eleanor Hawthorne sat by the fireplace, her auburn hair catching the flickering light, her green eyes distant but resolute. "My father told me he was changing the will," she admitted when Poirot pressed her, her voice low and bitter. "He said I'd get nothing unless I left Charles. I refused." Her hands clenched in her lap, her knuckles white. "I was in my room that night, Monsieur Poirot. I had no reason to enter his study. Yet her sorrow," Poirot noted, "was tinged with defiance. Was it the anger of a daughter betrayed, or the calculation of one who stood to lose everything?" Cedric Langley, the nephew, was less composed. His boyish charm had frayed, his nervous tic more pronounced as he clutched the gold cigarette case engraved with the colonel's initials. "If the will's gone, I'm ruined," he blurted, his voice cracking. "I owe thousands, gambling debts, bad investments. The colonel promised me a share, but only if I proved myself worthy." His eyes darted to Eleanor, then away. "I didn't take it, I swear. I was asleep at midnight." Poirot's gaze lingered on the cigarette case, found near the hidden passage. Was it a careless mistake, or a deliberate plant to shift suspicion? Cedric's desperation was palpable, but desperation could drive a man to murder, or make him a convenient scapegoat. Mr. Grayson, the butler, stood near the door, his starched collar as impeccable as ever, but his trembling hands betrayed his unease. "The colonel was agitated that evening," Grayson said when questioned, his voice steady but—
"Colonel," she insisted, her French accent faint but distinct. "My duties are with the children. I know nothing of his will or his secrets." Yet when Poirot mentioned the hidden passage, her eyes flickered, a fleeting shadow crossing her face. "I've never seen such a thing," she said, her voice too even. Poirot noted the grey fabric in his pocket, matching her dress. Her alibi, reading to the children, was strong, but the passage allowed for swift movement.
Could she have slipped away, struck the colonel, and returned unnoticed? Captain Arthur Ramsay, the disgraced officer, was a storm of barely contained rage. His scarred face and pronounced limp gave him the air of a man broken by time, yet his eyes burned with defiance. "Hawthorne ruined me," he growled when Poirot questioned him about the will. "I came to demand he clear my name, not to steal his fortune. I was in the guest wing, drinking when he died." His limp, Poirot observed, seemed less severe today, as if consciously exaggerated. The dagger, tied to the colonel's Indian campaign, linked Ramsay to the crime. But was his anger a motive or a distraction? Poirot returned to the study, his mind a whirl of details. The missing will pointed to greed, but the dagger and the cryptic letter suggested a deeper, more personal vendetta. He examined the letter again, its fresh ink on yellowed paper, a deliberate anomaly. The smudged fingerprint, too faint to identify, hinted at haste or carelessness. The dagger's serpentine handle, a relic of the colonel's time in India, was no random choice. Poirot consulted the colonel's journals, retrieved from the attic, and found a passage about a stolen dagger and a disgraced servant, a woman dismissed in shame. Could this connect to Miss Beaumont, whose guarded demeanor and French accent hinted at a hidden past? He summoned Grayson again, probing deeper. "You mentioned an argument between the colonel and Miss Beaumont," Poirot said, his tone mild but piercing. "What did you overhear?" Grayson's hands trembled more noticeably now. "It was vague, sir. Something about a promise broken, a debt unpaid. The colonel was harsh, and she wept." Shadows deepening as noon approached. Poirot stood by the study's window, gazing into the fog. The missing will, the dagger, the letter, the fabric, all were pieces of a puzzle, but the motive remained elusive. Eleanor's disinheritance, Cedric's debts, Grayson's unease, Clara's secrecy, Ramsay's rage, each was a thread, but which led to the killer? Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden scream from upstairs, sharp and piercing, echoing through the villa's corridors. He moved swiftly, his cane tapping as he ascended the stairs. The scream had come from Miss Beaumont's room, and he found her standing by her desk, her face pale, clutching a broken locket. "It was my mother's," she stammered, her voice trembling. "It fell, broke. I had a nightmare." Poirot's eyes narrowed. The locket, inscribed with "To Clara, 1895, was a clue to her past, but her age suggested it belonged to another. Was she hiding a connection to the colonel's history? 5. A Cry in the Night. Poirot. The fog that swaddled Rosewood Villa seemed to pulse with secrets, its tendrils curling through the windows as if to eavesdrop on the unfolding drama. Hercule Poirot stood in Miss Clara Beaumont's sparse bedroom, his sharp eyes fixed on the broken locket in her trembling hands. The screen that had drawn him here still echoed in his mind, a jagged note of fear, or perhaps deception. The governess's face was pale, her dark hair slightly disheveled, her gray dress rumpled as if she had been pacing before his arrival. The locket, inscribed with "To Clara, 1895, lay in pieces on the desk, its delicate clasp shattered. "It was my mother's," she stammered, her French accent more pronounced in her distress. "It fell during a nightmare. I didn't mean to scream." Poirot's mustache twitched, his gray cells alert to the faint tremor in her voice. Was this a genuine moment of vulnerability, or a carefully staged performance? "Mademoiselle," Poirot said, his tone gentle but probing. "A nightmare, it is a curious thing, no? It stirs the heart, but it does not break lockets."
Still embedded in Colonel Hawthorne's chest. Wiped clean, not a smudge. Whoever did this knew what they were about.
Poirot nodded, his eyes scanning the room. The blood-stained desk, the cryptic letter, "The past is not buried," and the empty safe, where the will had been kept, formed a constellation of clues, each pointing to a killer with intimate knowledge of the villa and its master. The hidden passage, discovered in the attic, was a masterstroke of deception, allowing the murderer to bypass locked doors. But the scream, the locket, and the scrap of gray fabric found in the passage gnawed at Poirot's instincts. The truth, he sensed, was close, yet veiled by misdirection. He returned to the drawing room, where the suspects sat in uneasy silence, their faces a gallery of suspicion and fear. Eleanor Hawthorne, the colonel's estranged daughter, sat by the fireplace, her auburn hair catching the flickering light, her green eyes distant. "I heard the scream," she said when Poirot questioned her, her voice steady, but tinged with concern. "I thought it was one of the children, but my room is too far to be sure." Her alibi for the night of the murder, alone in her room, remained uncorroborated, and her mention of the colonel's plan to disinherit her lingered in Poirot's mind. Was her sorrow genuine, or a mask for a deeper motive? Cedric Langley, the nephew, was a study in nervous energy, his fingers fidgeting with the gold cigarette case engraved with the colonel's initials. "I didn't hear anything," he insisted, his voice cracking. "I was asleep, dead to the world." Yet the cigarette case, found near the hidden passage, cast a shadow over his claims. Poirot leaned forward, his tone mild but piercing. "Monsieur, this case, it is yours. Yet it was found where only the killer might have passed. How do you explain this?" Cedric's face paled, his tic more pronounced. I don't know. Someone must have taken it, planted it to frame me." His desperation was palpable, but Poirot wondered if it was the panic. Rage, his scarred face and pronounced limp, gave him the air of a man worn by time, yet his eyes burned with defiance. "I heard the scream, but I was in the guest wing," he growled. "Too far to care. I've got no stake in this house's dramas." Poirot noted the inconsistency in Ramsay's limp, less severe today, as if less effort was made to maintain it. The dagger, tied to the colonel's Indian campaign, linked Ramsay to the crime. But was his bitterness a motive or a red herring? "You confronted the colonel about a scandal," Poirot said. "Was it resolved?" Ramsay's jaw tightened. "He laughed me off, said the past was done. I left him alive." His words were firm, but his eyes held a flicker of something. Guilt, or perhaps regret. Poirot paced the study, reconstructing the crime in his mind. The killer had entered via the hidden passage, struck the colonel with the antique dagger, and fled, leaving the cryptic letter to taunt or mislead. The passage's existence suggested intimacy with the villa's secrets, but the scream and the broken locket pointed to a more immediate disturbance. Poirot examined the locket again, its inscription, "To Clara, 1895. A clue to Miss Beaumont's past. Her claim that it was her mother's was plausible, but the year aligned with the colonel's Indian scandal, detailed in his journals. The journals mentioned a servant woman, dismissed in disgrace, whose fate echoed the resentment in the cryptic letter. Was Clara's mother that woman? And had her daughter sought revenge? He summoned Miss Beaumont again, his tone gentle but insistent. "Mademoiselle, this locket, it is a relic of pain, no? Tell me of your mother." Her composure cracked, her eyes glistening. "She was a governess like me," she said softly. "She worked for a military family in India, but she was wronged, cast out. She died when I was young." Her voice trembled, and Poirot's gray cells hummed. The connection was tenuous but compelling, a daughter avenging a mother's disgrace. Yet her alibi, supported by the children, held firm. The passage, however, allowed for swift movement. Could she have slipped away? committed the deed and returned unnoticed? Poirot revisited the passage, descending.
Clara. Her mother, perhaps. The photograph was torn, as if in anger, and Poirot tucked it into his pocket. The attic's footprints, the passage's mud, the groundskeeper's cloaked figure, all pointed to a killer who moved with purpose, cloaking their actions in the villa's shadows. The villa's silence was oppressive now, its walls seeming to whisper of betrayal and revenge. Poirot stood by the study's window, gazing into the fog. The missing will, the dagger, the letter, the locket, the fabric, all were threads in a tapestry of deception. Eleanor's disinheritance, Cedric's desperation, Grayson's unease, Clara's secrecy, Ramsay's rage. Each was a shadow, but which cast the darkest? The scream had been a crack in the facade, revealing a truth the killer could not fully conceal. As he turned from the window, a maid approached, her face pale.
"Sir, I found something in the garden," she whispered, holding out a bloodied glove. It matched the style worn by Grayson, but he had claimed to have lost one weeks ago. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Another planted clue, or a careless mistake? The puzzle was tightening, the truth drawing nearer.
Chapter 6. The Glove and the Lie. The fog that cloaked Rosewood Villa seemed to tighten its grip, as if the very air conspired to muffle the truth of Colonel Hawthorne's murder. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hall, the bloodied glove in his hand, its coarse fabric a stark contrast to the polished elegance of his surroundings. The glove, matching those worn by the butler, Mr. Grayson, was a tantalizing clue, either a careless mistake or a deliberate misdirection. Poirot's sharp eyes traced the villa's ornate mouldings, the portraits of stern hawthorns gazing down, their silence a challenge to his grey cells. The hidden passage, the cryptic letter, the missing will, the broken locket, and now this glove formed a constellation of evidence, each piece pointing to a killer who wove deception with chilling precision. Inspector Japp, hovering nearby, adjusted his hat with a scowl.
To the glove. It looks like mine, sir, but I swear I misplaced it long before the Colonel's death. Someone must have taken it. His voice was steady, but a bead of sweat traced his temple. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. And where were you at midnight, when the Colonel met his end? Grayson straightened, his hands clasped behind his back. In my quarters, sir, as I've said. I heard nothing until Miss Beaumont's scream this morning. Poirot noted the butler's tremor, a crack in his loyal facade. Was it fear of discovery, or merely the strain of suspicion? Poirot turned to the study, where the Colonel's body remained, covered now, but still a grim anchor to the crime. The antique dagger, its serpentine handle gleaming, was a relic of the Colonel's Indian campaign, tied to a scandal that had ruined Captain Ramsay. The cryptic letter, "The past is not buried," lay on the desk, its fresh ink on yellowed paper a deliberate enigma. Poirot examined the glove again, its bloodstains dried but vivid. The blood matched the Colonel's, Japp confirmed, but its placement in the garden suggested it was planted after the murder. The killer is clever, Poirot murmured, but not infallible. The glove, it is too convenient, too perfectly placed. He returned to the hidden passage, descending its damp steps to the study's concealed door. The scrap of grey fabric, matching Miss Beaumont's dress, remained a damning clue. He searched the passage again, his cane tapping the stone walls, until he found another trace, a faint smudge of mud on a step, matching the groundskeeper's report of a cloaked figure near the villa's gate at midnight.
The mud was fresh, suggesting the killer had moved between the villa and the outside world. Poirot's mind raced. The passage allowed swift entry and exit, but the glove and fabric pointed to different suspects. Was the killer framing Grayson and Clara, or were they both complicit? In the drawing room, Poirot confronted Captain Ramsay, whose scarred face and uneven limp made him a figure of both pity and menace. "Monsieur Ramsay," Poirot said, his tone mild but piercing, "you spoke of a scandal in India, a stolen—"
Her green eyes weary. "I heard nothing that night," she said, her voice soft but firm. "My father's decision to disinherit me was cruel, but I didn't kill him. I was in my room, alone." Her sorrow seemed genuine, but Poirot noted her hands, clasped tightly, as if holding back a deeper truth. The missing will, which would have cut her out, was a potent motive, yet her demeanor suggested resignation rather than rage. "You mentioned a letter from your father, mademoiselle," Poirot said. "Did it speak of reconciliation?" Eleanor nodded, producing a folded paper from her pocket. "He wrote last month, asking me to visit, but when I arrived, he was cold, distant." The letter, Poirot noted, was genuine, its tone regretful but vague. Cedric Langley, the nephew, was a bundle of nerves, his fingers twitching around the gold cigarette case. "I didn't take the will," he insisted, his voice rising. "Yes, I'm in debt, but I'd never kill for it. That cigarette case, someone stole it from my room to frame me." Poirot's eyes narrowed. The case, found near the passage, was a clumsy clue, too obvious to be accidental. "And your debts, monsieur," Poirot said, "they are substantial, no? Enough to drive a man to desperate acts?" Cedric's face flushed, his tic more pronounced. "I was asleep, I swear. Ask anyone." But no one could confirm his alibi, and Poirot's suspicions deepened. Miss Clara Beaumont was the most enigmatic. Her composure had returned, her gray dress immaculate, her dark hair swept into a chignon. "I know nothing of gloves or passages," she said, her French accent soft but clear. "I was with the children, reading until they slept." Yet the gray fabric, caught in the passage, matched her dress, and her broken locket hinted at a personal connection to the colonel's past. Poirot leaned forward, his voice gentle but insistent. "Mademoiselle, your locket, it bears an inscription. To Clara, 1895. Your mother, perhaps, knew the colonel in India?" Her face paled, her hands trembling slightly. "Murder, using the passage to strike and retreat." He revisited the study, reconstructing the timeline. The killer had entered via the passage, struck the colonel with the dagger, and left the cryptic letter to mislead. The glove, found in the garden, was a clumsy attempt to implicate Grayson, just as the cigarette case pointed to Cedric. The fabric, however, was less deliberate, caught by chance in the passage. Poirot's mind turned to Clara's scream, the broken locket, the diary. The killer was emotional yet calculating, driven by a past grievance, but careful to cover their tracks. The villa's silence was oppressive, its shadows deepening. As afternoon faded, Poirot stood by the study's window, gazing into the fog. The glove, the fabric, the locket, the letter, all were threads in a tapestry of deception. Eleanor's sorrow, Cedric's desperation, Grayson's unease, Clara's secrecy, Ramsay's rage. Each was a shadow, but Clara's past loomed largest. The groundskeeper's cloaked figure suggested an outsider, but the passage pointed to someone within the villa's walls. As Poirot turned from the window, a villager arrived, breathless from the journey. "I saw something last night," he whispered. "Miss Beaumont, near the colonel's study window at dusk." She was quick, like she didn't want to be seen. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The governess, poised and guarded, was unraveling under the weight of her secrets.
Chapter 7. The Locket's Secret. The fog that shrouded Rosewood Villa seemed to pulse with the weight of its secrets, as if the very walls of the estate whispered of betrayal and vengeance. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hall, the broken locket from Miss Clara Beaumont's room cradled in his gloved hand. Its inscription, to Clara, 1895, a fragile thread to a past that refused to stay buried. The villagers' report of seeing Clara near the colonel's study window at dusk had sharpened his focus, casting the governess's composed facade in a new, suspicious light. The hidden passage, the bloodied glove, the missing will, and now the locket formed a constellation of clues, each pointing to a killer whose motives were rooted in a long-ago wrong. Inspector Japp, pacing nearby,
Severe Chignol. Her grey dress immaculate despite the morning's chaos. Her hands were clasped tightly, her composure a mask that Poirot longed to pierce. "Mademoiselle," he began, holding up the locket. "This inscription, to Clara, 1895. It is not for you, I think. Your mother, perhaps, knew Colonel Hawthorne in a way that left scars?" Clara's face paled, her eyes flickering with a mix of fear and defiance. "My mother was a governess in India," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "She worked for a military family, and the colonel, he wronged her, cast her out. She died when I was a child." Her words were measured, but a tremor betrayed her. Poirot leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "And this wrong, it was personal, no? Enough to drive a daughter to seek justice?" Clara's lips tightened. "I had no reason to harm him. I was with the children, reading, when he died." Her alibi, supported by the innocent voices of the colonel's grandchildren, was unshakable. Yet the grey fabric caught in the passage and the villagers' sighting gnawed at Poirot's instincts. He pressed further, his voice soft but insistent. "The villager saw you near the study window at dusk, mademoiselle. Why were you there, if not to plan or observe?" Clara's composure cracked, her hands trembling. "I was walking the grounds, clearing my head. The children were asleep. I saw nothing, heard nothing." Her denial was swift, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of panic. Poirot noted it, his grey cells humming. The locket, the fabric, the argument Grayson had overheard, all pointed to Clara, but her alibi was a wall he could not yet breach. The hidden passage, however, offered a path for a swift strike and retreat. Could she have slipped away, murdered the colonel, and returned to the children unnoticed? Poirot turned to Eleanor Hawthorne, whose auburn hair glowed in the firelight, her green eyes weary but resolute. She sat by the fireplace, her hands clasped, her posture rigid. "I received a letter from my father last month," she said, producing a folded paper from her link to the passage where it was found. "I didn't take the will," he insisted, his voice rising. "Yes, I owe thousands, but I'd never kill for it. That case was stolen from my room." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Monsieur, your debts, they are a heavy burden, no? And the cigarette case, found where only the killer might have passed. How do you explain this?" Cedric's face flushed, his tic more pronounced. "Someone's framing me. I was asleep, I swear." His desperation was convincing, but Poirot noted the lack of an alibi. The case, too obvious a clue, suggested a deliberate attempt to shift suspicion. But by whom? Mr. Grayson, the butler, stood near the door, his starched collar impeccable, but his hands betraying a faint tremor. "I know nothing of the will's whereabouts," he said, his voice steady but his eyes avoiding Poirot's. "I locked the house at 10, as always, and retired." Poirot leaned forward. "And the argument you overheard between the colonel and Mademoiselle Beaumont, what was its nature?" Grayson hesitated, a bead of sweat tracing his temple. "It was about her mother, sir.
The colonel said she'd shamed him, that she'd never be forgiven. She wept, but I heard no more. Poirot's grey cells hummed. The argument, tied to Clara's past, aligned with the locket and the cryptic letter. Grayson's unease suggested he knew more, but was it loyalty or guilt that kept him silent? Captain Arthur Ramsay, the disgraced officer, was a storm of resentment, his scarred face and uneven limp a testament to a life of conflict. "I had no interest in the colonel's will," he growled, his fists clenched. "I came to clear my name, not to steal his fortune. I was in the guest wing, drinking, when he died." Poirot noted the limp, less pronounced today, as if Ramsay's pain was a performance. "And the dagger, monsieur," Poirot said. "It is from your time in India, no? A relic of the scandal that ruined you?" Ramsay's eyes blazed. "I didn't touch it.
Likely a gift from Marie, a relic of her shame." Clara's scream, her presence near the study window, her mother's disgrace, all pointed to revenge as a motive. He revisited the passage, searching for further clues. Near the concealed door, he found a faint scratch on the wall, as if something had been dragged through. A small button, mother of pearl, lay in the dust, matching those on Clara's dress. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The evidence against her was mounting, but her alibi remained a barrier. He summoned the children, two wide-eyed girls who confirmed Clara's presence during their bedtime story. "She read to us until we slept," they said, their voices innocent. Yet Poirot wondered if Clara, knowing the passage, could have slipped away and returned in minutes. The villa's silence was oppressive, its shadows deepening as evening approached. Poirot stood by the study's window, gazing into the fog. The locket, the fabric, the button, the letter, all pointed to Clara. But the glove and cigarette case suggested a broader conspiracy. Eleanor's letter, Cedric's debts, Grayson's unease, Ramsay's rage, each was a thread. But Clara's past loomed largest. The villager's sighting, the groundskeeper's cloaked figure, the attic's footprints, all suggested a killer who moved with purpose, cloaking their actions in the villa's secrets. As Poirot turned from the window, a maid approached, her face pale. "Sir, I found something in Mr. Ramsay's luggage," she whispered, holding out a second dagger, identical to the murder weapon. Its serpentine handle gleamed, a twin to the blade in the colonel's chest. Poirot's grey cells hummed. Another clue, too perfect to be accidental. Chapter 8. The Second Dagger. The fog that enveloped Rosewood Villa seemed to tighten its grip, as if the estate itself sought to smother the truth of Colonel Hawthorne's murder. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hall, the second dagger in his gloved hand, its serpentine handle gleaming with an eerie twinship to the blade buried in the colonel's chest. The maid's discovery and cells. He turned toward the drawing room, where the suspects awaited, their faces a gallery of tension, fear, and guarded secrets, each a thread in the intricate tapestry of the crime. Poirot summoned Captain Ramsay first, the disgraced officer's scarred face darkening as he saw the dagger. "That's not mine," he growled, his fists clenching, his limp more pronounced as he shifted in his chair. "Someone planted it in my luggage to frame me. I haven't seen that blade since India." His voice was thick with rage, but Poirot noted a flicker of fear in his eyes. "Monsieur Ramsay?" Poirot said, his tone mild but piercing. "This dagger. It is identical to the one that killed the colonel, a relic of your shared past. You admit to a scandal that ruined you. Why should I not believe you sought revenge? Ramsay's jaw tightened, his eyes blazing. I came to clear my name, not to kill. I was in the guest wing, drinking, when he died. Search my room again if you doubt me. Poirot observed the limp, less severe today, as if Ramsay's pain was a performance adjusted to circumstance. The dagger, tied to the 1895 scandal, was a potent clue, but its placement in Ramsay's luggage was too convenient, suggesting a deliberate attempt to shift suspicion. Poirot turned to Miss Clara Beaumont, whose composure remained a mask of serene control, though her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them in her lap. Her grey dress, matching the fabric caught in the passage, and the broken locket inscribed, "To Clara, 1895, linked her to the Colonel's past. "Mademoiselle," Poirot began, holding up the dagger, "you knew the Colonel in India, through your mother, perhaps. This blade, it is from that time, no?" Clara's eyes flickered, a shadow crossing her face. "I know nothing of daggers," she said, her French accent soft but firm. "My mother worked for a military family, yes, but I was a child when she died. I was with the children, reading, when the Colonel was killed." Her alibi, supported by the innocent voices of the Colonel's grandchildren, was unshakable, yet the villagers' sighting of her near the study noted the letter she had shown him, its regretful tone suggesting a reconciliation that never came. "Mademoiselle," he said, "your father's will. It would have left you nothing. Did you know where it was kept?" Eleanor's hands clenched, her knuckles white. "He told me it was in the safe, but I never saw it. I didn't care for the money, only his forgiveness." Her sorrow seemed genuine, but Poirot wondered if her presence at Rosewood was driven by more than filial duty. The missing will was a potent motive, yet her demeanor suggested resignation rather than rage. Cedric Langley, the nephew, was a bundle of nerves, his boyish charm frayed by desperation. His fingers clutched the gold cigarette case, its engraved initials R.H., a damning link to the passage. "I didn't plant that dagger," he blurted, his voice rising. "Just like I didn't drop my cigarette case. Someone's framing me, I swear." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Monsieur, your debts, they are substantial, no? And the cigarette case, found where only the killer might have passed. How do you explain this?" Cedric's face flushed, his tic more pronounced. "It was stolen from my room. I was asleep at midnight. Ask anyone." But no one could confirm his alibi, and Poirot noted the panic in his eyes. The cigarette case and the dagger were clumsy clues, too obvious to the accidental, suggesting a broader conspiracy to mislead. Mr. Grayson, the butler, stood near the door, his starched collar impeccable, but his hands betraying a faint tremor. Poirot confronted him about the glove, now joined by the dagger as a planted clue. "Monsieur Grayson," he said, "you claim to have lost your glove weeks ago, yet it was found bloodied in the garden. And now, a dagger in Monsieur Ramsay's luggage. Are these coincidences, or is someone weaving a web to ensnare you both?" Grayson's face paled, his hands trembling more noticeably. "I swear, sir, I know nothing of these things. I locked the house at 10 and retired. But did overhear the Colonel threaten to expose Mademoiselle Beaumont's past 2 days before his death." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Expose her how, monsieur?" Grayson hesitated, a bead of carelessness. Poirot examined the Colonel's journals again, retrieved from the attic. A passage detailed the 1895 scandal, where Marie Beaumont, a governess, was dismissed after a liaison with a soldier, blamed by the Colonel for tarnishing his honor. The locket, inscribed to Clara, was a gift from Marie, a relic of her disgrace. The argument Grayson overheard, the villager's sighting, the cryptic letter, all aligned with a motive of revenge. He revisited the passage, searching for further clues. Near the concealed door, he found a faint scratch on the wall, suggesting something had been dragged through.
The mud on the steps, matching the groundskeeper's report of a cloaked figure, confirmed the killer's movements between the villa and the outside world. Poirot's mind raced. The passage allowed swift entry and exit, but the planted clues suggested a killer who delighted in misdirection. Clara's alibi, supported by the children, was a barrier, but the passage's proximity to the nursery allowed for a quick strike and return. The villa's silence was oppressive, its shadows deepening as evening fell. Poirot stood by the study's window, gazing into the fog. The daggers, the locket, the fabric, the glove, the cigarette case, all were threads in a tapestry of deception. Eleanor's sorrow, Cedric's desperation, Grayson's unease, Clara's secrecy, Ramsay's rage, each was a shadow. But Clara's past loomed largest. The villager's sighting, the groundskeeper's cloaked figure, the attic's footprints, all pointed to a killer who moved with purpose, cloaking their actions in the villa's secrets. As Poirot turned from the window, a maid approached, her face pale. "Sir, I found something in Mademoiselle Beaumont's wardrobe," she whispered, holding out a blood-stained shawl, its grey wool matching the fabric from the passage. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The evidence against Clara was mounting, but was it too perfect? Another layer of misdirection? Chapter 9. The final clue. The fog that swaddled Rosewood Villa seemed to tighten its hold, as if the estate itself sought to guard the final secrets of Colonel Hawthorne's murder. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hall.
However damning is but a thread in the tapestry. The shawl, it speaks loudly, but we must listen to the silences between. Let us gather the household, for the truth, it is ready to be unveiled. He turned toward the drawing room, his cane tapping a deliberate rhythm, his gray cells arranging the puzzle's pieces into a coherent picture. The drawing room was a crucible of tension, the suspects seated in a semicircle, their faces a gallery of fear, defiance, and resignation. Eleanor Hawthorne sat by the fireplace, her auburn hair catching the flickering light, her green eyes weary but resolute. Cedric Langley slouched in an armchair, his fingers clutching the gold cigarette case, his nervous tic more pronounced. Mr. Grayson stood near the door, his starched collar impeccable, but his hands trembling faintly. Captain Arthur Ramsay, his scarred face dark with resentment, shifted uneasily, his limp less pronounced today. And Miss Clara Beaumont, her dark hair swept into a chignon, her gray dress immaculate, sat with a composure that seemed to waver under Poirot's gaze. Poirot stood at the center, the shawl in one hand, the second dagger in the other, his voice measured but commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his eyes sweeping the room. "A murder has been committed in this house, a crime of passion and precision. The colonel was struck down in his study, a locked room, by a dagger from his past, a hidden passage, a cryptic letter, a missing will, a glove, a cigarette case, a locket, and now this shawl. These are the threads of a web woven by a killer among us." The room fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. He turned to Clara, his gaze piercing. "Mademoiselle Beaumont, the evidence against you is formidable. The fabric in the passage, the button, the shawl, all match your attire. The locket, inscribed to Clara 1895, links you to a scandal in the colonel's past, a wrong done to your mother, Marie Beaumont, dismissed in disgrace. The villager saw you near the study window at dusk, and Monsieur Grayson overheard your argument with the colonel, where he threatened to expose your mother's shame. Tell me, why should I not believe you sought revenge?" Clara's face passage cast suspicion, but the case is too obvious. A plant, perhaps. "Monsieur Grayson, the bloodied glove points to you, yet your loyalty suggests you are a pawn, not a king. And Monsieur Ramsay, the second dagger in your luggage, a twin to the murder weapon, implicates you, yet your limp, it wavers, as if a performance." He paced the room, his cane tapping rhythmically. The killer used the hidden passage, known only to someone intimate with the villa's secrets. The dagger, a relic of India, was chosen for its symbolism. The letter, "The past is not buried," was written in fresh ink on old paper, a deliberate taunt. The glove, the cigarette case, the second dagger, these are red herrings, planted to mislead. But the fabric, the button, the shawl, these are less deliberate, clues caught by chance in the killer's haste. Poirot returned to Clara, his voice soft but unrelenting. "Mademoiselle, your mother's diary, found in the attic, speaks of a betrayal by the colonel. She was dismissed, her honor tarnished, her life ruined. You came to Rosewood not as a governess but as an avenger, no? You knew the passage, perhaps from your mother's stories of the villa. You waited until dusk, observed the study, and at midnight you struck, using the dagger to right an old wrong." Clara's composure collapsed, her hands covering her face as she sobbed. No, I didn't. I couldn't." But her voice faltered, and Poirot's eyes gleamed. He turned to the household, his voice rising. "The letter. It was your creation, mademoiselle, written on paper from the colonel's journals to mislead. The glove, the cigarette case, the second dagger, these you planted to implicate others, knowing suspicion would scatter. But the shawl, caught in your wardrobe, and the fabric in the passage, these you could not hide. The children, they trust you, and their innocence gave you the alibi you needed. But the passage, it allowed you to move unseen, to strike and return in moments." Clara's sobs grew louder, her hands trembling as she rose. It was for her, she wished. But the planted clues had nearly obscured the truth. Eleanor's sorrow, Cedric's desperation, Grayson's unease, Ramsay's rage, each had been a shadow, but Clara's past had cast the darkest. The glove, the cigarette case, the second dagger, red herrings all, designed to confuse. The passage, known only to someone with a deep connection to the villa, had been her tool, and the dagger, a symbol of her mother's shame, her weapon. The villa's silence was oppressive, its shadows softening as the fog began to lift. Poirot gazed at the suspects, their faces reflecting the weight of the revelation. Eleanor's eyes glistened with tears. Cedric's shoulders slumped in relief. Grayson's hands steadied, and Ramsay's defiance softened into resignation. The truth had been uncovered, but at a cost. As Japp escorted Clara from the room, Poirot's mind lingered on the locket, its inscription a testament to a mother's pain and a daughter's vengeance. The puzzle was nearly complete, but a final question remained. Would Clara's confession hold, or was there another layer to this tragedy? The fog that had clung to Rosewood Villa began to dissipate, as if the estate itself exhaled in relief at the unmasking of Colonel Hawthorne's killer. The grand hall, with its towering portraits and muted chandelier, stood in somber silence, the weight of Clara Beaumont's confession lingering like a shadow. Hercule Poirot stood by the fireplace in the drawing-room, his polished cane resting lightly in his hand, his sharp eyes scanning the assembled suspects. Their faces, Eleanor Hawthorne's tear-streaked sorrow, Cedric Langley's slumped relief, Mr. Grayson's steadied composure, and Captain Arthur Ramsay's grudging acceptance, reflected the end of a tragedy that had unraveled the villa's secrets. Inspector Japp, standing near the door, adjusted his hat, his face grim but satisfied. "You've done it again, Poirot," he said, his voice low. "Clara's confession ties it all up. A tidy end to a devilish case." Poirot's moustache twitched, his expression somber yet resolute. "Mon ami, the truth. It is never tidy. It is a mere blood-stained shawl. These were the threads of a tapestry woven by a killer among us." The suspects sat in silence, their eyes fixed on Poirot, each grappling with the weight of the truth. He turned to Clara, who stood pale and trembling, her dark hair falling loose from its chignon, her grey dress a stark reminder of the fabric caught in the passage. "Mademoiselle Beaumont," Poirot said, his voice gentle but unyielding, "you have confessed to the murder of Colonel Hawthorne. Tell us, in your own words, how you brought this tragedy to pass." Clara's eyes glistened with tears, her voice barely above a whisper.
"It was for my mother, Marie Beaumont,"
she began, her French accent thick with emotion.
"She was a governess in India, serving a military family in 1895. The colonel, he seduced her, then cast her out when she bore his shame. She died broken, alone, leaving me the locket and her diary. I came to Rosewood to confront him, to make him pay for what he did." She paused, her hands trembling as she continued. "I found the hidden passage in her diary, a secret she'd learned while working here years ago. I planned it carefully, watching his study at dusk, waiting until midnight when the house slept. I used the passage, took the dagger from his collection, a symbol of his power over her. I stabbed him, left the letter to make him know why. The glove, the cigarette case, the second dagger. I planted them to confuse, to point to others. But the shawl, I didn't realize it caught in the passage." Her voice broke, sobs shaking her slight frame. "I wanted justice for her, but I became a monster." Poirot nodded, his expression sombre. "The past. It is a heavy burden, mademoiselle. Your mother's pain drove you to this act, but it has only deepened the tragedy." He turned to Jap, who stepped forward, his face stern. "Clara Beaumont, you're under arrest for the murder of Colonel Reginald—"
"Didn't know," she whispered, her voice heavy with guilt. "My father, he hurt so many people. I thought he wanted to reconcile, but he was cruel to the end." Poirot nodded, his gaze softening. "Mademoiselle, your sorrow, it is genuine. The letter from your father, it was a promise unfulfilled, but it proves your innocence. The will, found this morning in the attic, confirms you as the heir. You sought forgiveness, not vengeance." Cedric Langley slumped in his chair, the gold cigarette case resting in his lap, his nervous tic subdued. "I thought I was done for," he admitted, his voice low. "The debts, the case, it all pointed to me. But I didn't kill him." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Monsieur, your desperation was a motive, but your fear, it was that of an innocent man. The cigarette case, it was a clumsy plant, meant to mislead. You must face your debts, but not a murderer's guilt." Mr. Grayson stood near the door, his hands steady now, his starched collar a symbol of his restored dignity. "I served the colonel faithfully," he said, his voice firm. "I knew nothing of the passage or the glove." Poirot inclined his head. "Monsieur, your loyalty was tested, but you are no killer. The glove was taken to implicate you, but your unease was that of a man caught in a storm, not of his making." Captain Ramsay, his scarred face softened by relief, leaned back in his chair, his limp barely noticeable now. "I hated Hawthorne," he admitted, his voice gruff, "but I didn't kill him. That dagger in my luggage, it was a lie to trap me." Poirot nodded. "Monsieur, your anger was justified, but your innocence is clear. The second dagger,
like the first, was a symbol of a past you did not choose. Poirot paced the room, his cane tapping a slow rhythm. The killer, she was meticulous, using the passage to strike unseen. The dagger, a relic of the Colonel's Indian campaign, was chosen for its meaning, a weapon of his power turned against him. The letter, written on old paper from his
Poirot bowed slightly. Mademoiselle, understanding, it is the first step to healing. Cedric, humbled, promised to face his debts, while Grayson resumed his duties with quiet resolve. Ramsay left the villa, his pride wounded but his name cleared, his limp fading as he walked into the dawn. Poirot stepped outside, the Sussex air crisp and clear, the fog retreating to reveal the rolling downs. Rosewood Villa stood quiet, its secrets laid bare, its wounds exposed, but beginning to mend. Clara's confession had closed the case, but the echo of her sobs lingered, a reminder of the cost of vengeance. Poirot's motorcar awaited, its engine humming softly, ready to carry him back to the world beyond. He paused, his eyes scanning the villa's facade, its ivy-clad turrets a testament to time's endurance. "The grey cells, they do not lie," he murmured, his mustache twitching with a faint smile. The puzzle was solved, the truth unveiled, but the past, like the fog, would always leave a trace.